Welcome everyone to another episode of Soul Struggles, where we talk about everyday struggles. Today we have with us Dr. Christina Agaibi, therapist with master's and doctoral level training in counseled psychology, focus in resilience. Dr. Christine, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, this is a new setting, it's a new space, but we want to continue on all the episodes that we started. As you all know, with COVID, the focus on mental health has been great. So we have a lot of topics to cover, but today's topic is a bit tough, and a lot of people have been dealing with it, unfortunately, with COVID, losing a loved one. We've lost a lot. And before you guess it, today's topic is grief. And my first question to you, it's the obvious question. And can you describe grief for us?
Absolutely, that is a great question, and thank you for bringing us here today to discuss this important topic. And grief is any time it's a normal human response or an emotion to any time there is a loss or a change in trajectory. And it's experienced by all humans at some point. So we have to learn how to deal with it, of course, but it also unites us as human beings, and it's part of the human condition. And it can be really complex with a lot of, complex emotions and unresolved emotions. And so that's why we need to deal with grief really effectively through different stages and different techniques.
If you would have to visualize grief, would you put it in a pattern? I've heard a lot of people that's dealing with losing someone, they'll always say there's no rule to it, and there's no pattern to it, and there's no time limit to it. Yeah. So from your point of view as a psychologist, is there a specific pattern or a way to describe it in levels?
Yeah, there's certainly, everybody experiences it in their own way, and two people may experience the same loss and experience it very differently than each other. But we do see some hallmarks that are processed in all grief, and some stages. And we initially thought that people just go through those stages and you get to the end where acceptance is, and that would be it. But now we notice that it's much more fluid, it's much more occurring simultaneously of these different stages. And so the stages are, sometimes people may be in denial initially, and that's a way to protect us from a defense, let's say, of can this really be happening, from some strong emotions. And so it's a defense and overwhelming, to deal with the overwhelming emotions of grief. And then people sometimes go into anger and say that this is unfair, or this is a really painful set of emotions. And so, people go through anger and they can't believe that this is happening and say that this is unfair. And then sometimes people will bargain a little bit and say that, if I would have done this, or I could have done that, and things had changed if only I had done this. And so while we're doing that, we want to make sure that we're not losing views of reality, because sometimes things cannot be changed, and so we shouldn't feel that overwhelming sense of guilt that will take over people. And then sometimes people go into depression and they feel physically and emotionally drained, and they can't deal with the challenges that they're facing. And so they want to figure out a way to get out of that depression. We'll talk about depression as well. But eventually, hopefully, we get to a place of acceptance where we're recognizing what has happened, recognizing that this is part of our makeup now, part of our environment, but we have to adapt to this new normal. And how do we put one foot in front of the other? And again, people go through all these stages fluid. Sometimes they get acceptance and go back to depression or back to bargaining. So it's much more simultaneous and fluid than it was initially.
Does grief has to only do with losing a person out of the life, or of losing somebody who's a death of a person?
Yeah, that's the common misconception, that it's just dealt with a loss of a loved one, with someone passing away. But grief can come from any change of trajectory. If somebody loses their job, if somebody loses their home, if they lose a relationship that is long-term, or a friendship, all of these can set off certain emotions of grief, and grief can look in lots of different ways, different emotions, different thoughts, different behaviors that go along with that. And so it's not just the experience of losing a loved one and having someone pass away.
Now, one of the things that are in our ancient Egyptian history, I've read about before, which is actually a misconception, but it's or a myth. They used to, for funerals to the gods, they used to rent a woman, and they would rent her to the funeral to cry and wail. And over the years, that tradition have carried culturally in our funerals, where you're used to walking into a space where people are grieving someone, and that's really the image, or basically the scene that takes place is somebody wailing and crying. And to us, that's the image of what grief looks like. What are some of the misconceptions about the image of grief as a whole, and some of the myth that we have misunderstood over the years culturally?
Yeah, different cultures have different ways of dealing with grief. What we often see is that there's a sadness that needs to be expressed in some way, whether it's wailing or crying or memorializing that person in some way. Like I said before, some people experience anger and that this isn't fair or it's frustrating. Some may experience guilt over the situation, or anxiety or loneliness or fatigue, a sense of helplessness, a sense of yearning or shock over what has happened. Some want to help others through that situation, and some may even feel numbness. So people experience different kinds of things. You may even feel physical sensations. So something in your body is telling you that your body is grieving. Some people may have some disbelief and confusion and thoughts and being preoccupied with those events. Some may have affecting of their appetite or their sleep, too much sleep or too little sleep. Some may withdraw socially from others, and unfortunately, that's something we see even more so with COVID when we had to separate from loved ones. But we really should be connecting with others, and we should be connecting with others during times of grief. Some have a lot of dreams or dream disturbances or sleep disturbances related to these events, and some avoid talking about it altogether because they can't face it. And some cry, sometimes even at times where it's just out of the blue. They could be, doing the dishes in the kitchen, and all of a sudden they start weeping for no reason. So we see all of these things, but the tears are really an expression of emotion, and sometimes we, say we shouldn't do these things or we should do more of them, but there is no really proper way to grieve, quote unquote. It's just the manifestation of the feelings that you're experiencing, and different cultures may express it in different ways.
So when would you say it's a problem? Like, when would you say it's too much?
Yeah, grief can be problematic if it is not kept in check, if it's gone on for long periods of time and the person can't function anymore, they can't get out of bed, they can't do their work, they can't tend to their families. That's a sign that grief is becoming more chronic and more problematic. If it's exaggerated in some way and there's maladaptive coping skills, use of substances, doing things that are going to be harmful, or if the grief is really delayed, it's been a year or two and they haven't really cried or expressed any grief towards that person, but you know that they were close to the person that was lost, or this event was really significant in their lives. And also if their symptoms have been masked in some way, and so they're not expressing it the way that they should. These are all symptoms that tell us that grief is not being expressed the way that it should. And sometimes, the person, like I said, withdraws or uses maladaptive coping mechanisms like substances. Those are all signs that the grief is taking a turn that it should be looked at more systematically with professional help.
Well, now that we're really bringing it to the light, do you think it's more effective for the family members surrounding the person who's grieving to understand what they're going through, or it's more of a priority for the person who's grieving to understand what they're going through?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think we should have that insight within ourselves that something is off. I'm not working like I should. I'm not tending to my family. I'm not even tending to, my own hygiene or my own, sleeping or my own eating habits or things like that. So in those things, a person should be aware something is off. Maybe I should get some professional help. And also for the loved ones that are caring for that person or noticing that they may be going in a direction that they should not be going, maybe they should nudge them in the direction of professional help and say, it's okay to go talk to someone about this and process it a little bit better. And the more they memorialize the person that they loved, or be able to hold the fact that this situation happened to them, but they're also able to function, that is where resilience kind of turns the corner and helps them to move forward.
Well, Dr. Christine, thank you so much for sharing these insights with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Soul Struggles. Until we meet next time on our next episode.